Hey guys, welcome to the 15th episode of the Dental Business Pod. This is a periodic live dental business webinar with industry experts like Jonathan here today, brought to you by Song Dental Partners here. We share the key knowledge for practice management while learning from the expert. My name is Jonathan Song. I'm a wet finger dental dentist in Southern California. I currently own and operate 3 dental practices in Los Angeles and Orange County area. I'm in the process of making my own dental ecosystem to benefit from and share the DSO level services for private practices, which includes organized ownership and management of diversified dental office types, dental lab services, HR services, reporting and accounting, IT, and more. We plan to grow to 10 million total revenue with 5 private offices by 2026. I know there's only less than 2 years left, but we'll see. Without compromising ethics and clinical quality in Southern California, I'm recording my journey so we can all learn from it. So stay tuned for all the ups and downs of this crazy attempt. With the speaker's permission, the recordings will be available in our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@SongDentalPartners. Please share, subscribe, like, and comment so we can keep evolving this platform and provide more value to more people by bridging many more amazing guests like Jonathan. Just to go over some housekeeping rules, please keep your type your questions in the chat so we can make sure to cover all that if we didn't cover in the lecture. Speaker's contact info can be found at our YouTube episode in the channel. When you contact the speaker, please let him know you were at the webinar. And today we have Jonathan Miller here from Novo Practice, who is graciously offering his expertise and time tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan here. Jonathan spent almost 10 years with one of the largest dental specific lenders in the industry. His focus was helping dentists evaluate their first practice purchase or through help with obtaining the right project financing for a scratch startup. During that time, he helped open over 200 new de novo dental offices and performed as a project manager and financial analyst for the first-time practice buyers. In total, he has helped close to 1,000 doctors all over the country find their first practice to purchase or start their first practice. As a result of his reputation and relationships, he was invited to speak year after year to some of the top dental schools in the country, like UCLA, Loma Linda, Western University, as well as University of Pennsylvania and Temple. It was his passion for first-time owners that led Jonathan to leave corporate banking and follow his passion for helping those to seek accurate information instead of affirmation. Since 2016, he has helped close to 60 first-time owners towards buying or starting their optimal practice. He even wrote a book titled, Don't Sweat the Startup. I need to get that book. As your advocate, Jonathan can show doctors the path towards practice ownership while minimizing their risk and taking away the fear of the unknown. With the help of his relationship in the industry, we can show doctors how to grow their practice and build their brand while maximizing their return on investment. So without further ado, please welcome Jonathan Miller here.
Thank you. That is a heck of an intro. We're just going to shorten it next time to like, this is a guy that has done this a bunch of times.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to go ahead and jump right in here and share the presentation. Right. I don't nearly consider myself like the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musk of the world. But if I could, I would get rid of PowerPoint like those guys have in their organizations. I don't know if you know this, Dr. Song, but Bezos, if you're going to do a meeting anywhere in his organization in Amazon, it's a 6-page memo, and there's like a structure and an outline, and you go through that in any meeting, and that's it. That's all you get. Now, I've never worked there, so this is the stuff you read at like a Forbes.com and all that stuff. Who knows? Maybe it's all nonsense. So hopefully somebody can fact check that. But tonight's presentation is all about information and not affirmation. So that's going to be a theme throughout. That's something that I'm probably going to say a lot because I do believe that we're in a world today where it's very, very easy to go seek out affirmation and people telling you that you're right and people telling you that this is the best idea ever. And it's getting much harder to go get accurate information. So that's why I do what I do. I do want to cover these 3 things. What do I do? Why I do it, and the mistakes I see too often. really at my core, I fell out of love with corporate banking, like a lot of you probably fell out of love with corporate dentistry. And when you're working as an associate, at some point you pick your head up and go, hey, enough's enough. Either I think I can do it better, I believe in a better path, maybe I can offer a better experience. But at some point you have to say, hey, this is the end of the line for me, and I need to go find my own way. And we'll talk tonight about the different versions of startups versus the different versions of acquisition, because there are different things. And by the end of this, you'll have a clear idea of which version is right for you, at least information wise. There still may be some tough decisions to make for you. No way do I think that you're going to end this webinar and go, okay, I know exactly the path I'm supposed to take. Because to be honest with you, if that's true, you're probably leaning towards that path anyway. And tonight might just give you the little nudge to move one way or the other. I will say that I don't think practice ownership's for everyone. In the end, in some cases, it may make a lot of sense to be an associate doctor and to go in and collect a check and go home and kind of leave everything at the office and kind of come in and clock in the morning and clock out and know that, hey, somebody else is going to take care of it. An office manager is going to be responsible for the schedule or for the insurance or for ARs or for why patients aren't appointing, and no one's ever really going to ask you about it. So I do think there are some situations where I have actually talked doctors, I don't want to say out of, but influenced them away from going into practice ownership. And I do find that some folks, if you think that journey is going to be nothing but champagne and cupcakes, Dr. Song can tell you that it's not. There's definitely a lot of hard work. I'm sure there's some times where you doubt yourself, where you're not sure. And so why I do what I do is I want to be the advocate for someone. I want to be, in some cases, your biggest cheerleader. I want to be your fan. I want to let you know that, hey, you're doing the right thing. Hey, you've made the right decisions. Hey, you didn't come this far to only come this far. I also sometimes got to protect you from making mistakes, signing up with certain, insert vendors, whether it's banks, equipment folks, IT companies, that there are a lot of well-intended people out there. But as the saying goes, the pathway to failure is littered with good intentions. So what I do is at my core, I'm a startup consultant. I focus on helping doctors either start their first practice or buy their first practice. And in fact, when I got started, I thought I would only help startup doctors kind of do the from scratch route. But all the doctors I work with typically come via word of mouth. And so I get referred from one doctor to another and that doctor to another. And that's been really refreshing and rewarding for me. But also it means that I got to perform at a high level, because if I work with someone, they're probably not going to refer me their friends or relatives if I didn't do well. And you're certainly going to tell your friends and relatives, I don't sign up with that guy. I signed up with him. It was crap. And he took my money. It was junk. It was whatever. And I certainly can't afford for that to happen. So at my core, I'm here to shepherd you through this process and make sure that you avoid the mistakes. And ultimately, I want to help preserve the private practice. Because in my opinion, if there isn't a line drawn in the sand, or if people young in career don't believe that there's a path forward towards practice ownership, then the corporations will come in and take over. They did it with the MDs years and years ago, and that's why we have the hospital system that we do today. And there are some great clinicians out there that are MDs and some great providers out there in the hospital system. But ultimately, there's a handful of articles probably every few months about hospital system this and took advantage of profits and, deprioritized patients and instead prioritized how much the CEO of the hospital makes and all those things. So I'm here to help you avoid all that stuff. And then ultimately, I'll talk and highlight some of the mistakes I see far too often. And maybe that spurs some conversation out of this. And there's a bit of Q&A. So there will be some opportunities to interact if you want. And if not, I can certainly go through the PowerPoint as it stands. But again, this is not meant to be a death by PowerPoint. And so here it is, again, just in case somebody is just now tuning in, is all about information versus affirmation. And, specifically speaking, there are some dangerous places out there on the internet where you can go out and hear folks, as I was talking to Dr. Song before we officially started this evening, it was about, I call it the first time expert or the one time expert. But put yourself for a second back in dental school, back in clinic, and imagine that, you saw your buddy walking out, you're about to walk in, your buddy kind of went out a little bit too hard last night. And they, oh, wow, I'm surprised you're even here at clinic today. And they come out and high five you and go, hey, you won't believe this. I just placed my first crown. And it was so good. The professor said, I'm teaching the course on crowns from now on. I'm crushing it. You'd laugh. If you're being honest, you go, wait, what? Like, hey, man, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, as the saying goes. So I don't think you should be teaching the course on how to place crowns. Maybe you just got lucky. But that doesn't happen, in the world of message boards and social media and those kinds of things. A lot of times we're hearing from folks that have done it one time. And the commitment I make to every single doctor I work with is I'm not here to quote unquote be right or tell you that my way is the right way. I'm here to work with you and collaborate with you because I want to get it right. And what I mean specifically by that is I think there's a lot of different ways to have a successful startup or a successful acquisition. I've worked with doctors that want to do nothing but take state-backed Medicaid plans and HMO plans, and they don't touch PPOs. And I've certainly got doctors that say, I'd never touch that stuff. I'm actually going to go only fee for service and take no PPOs from day one, and let's see where the chips fall. And I've seen both sides do very, very well. And I've seen doctors that take nothing but PPOs struggle, and I've seen doctors that take a lot of state-backed plans thrive. And of course, vice versa. So having all that experience takes me down the path with each and every doctor I work with to say, hey, let's focus on what your outcomes are and what your goals are. And then let's focus on the best plan to get you there. Because you might be single, young, running around town, not a lot of things pulling on you, and doing a startup makes a lot of sense. Or you might have a few kids. You might have been out of school for a while. You're married. Your spouse has got a job. You obviously have an associate position and you want to go into practice ownership, but what worked for you may not work for the person that you're asking on social media or vice versa. So information over affirmation. I try to be as informative as I can. Now on that, here's 8 things every overthinker needs to know. The first one is the problem is rarely the problem. You have to avoid self-rejection. We are sometimes our own worst enemy. In often cases, I think we are our own worst enemy. And we're telling ourselves a story day in and day out. It's kind of like when you're trying to explain to a patient, periodontal disease is a real thing. And if you have and been diagnosed with perio, then you're swallowing these bits of infection all day, every day inside your mouth. And so it's the same thing that happens with that little voice in your head that's telling you, oh, it's a dumb idea. Oh, you'll never be successful. Oh, it'll never work out well for you. You're telling yourself that story day in and day out. And so it really, as number 8 says here at the bottom of the list, it all starts in the mind. And so the loudest voice in any room is the voice inside your head. Now, number 3, silence and time solves most of your problems. If you take a step back, Steve Jobs loved to go for a walk. And now there's actually science that backs up when you get out and get physical, because you're trying to think about ways to solve a problem. There's a different part of your brain that fires up that helps you actually overcome complex problems than if you're trying to sit at your desk and bury yourself into it and say, I'm not going to leave this desk until I figure this out. It's actually better to go out and get some sort of physical activity, go for a walk. Some people go for a jog, etc. But silence and time will solve a lot of your problems. Then the question to be asked is this one: is there anything I can do right now to change the past or make an impact on my future? That's a really, really good one. You know, the other one I like to ask is, hey, what's the most important thing I can do right now? Or what's the one thing I can do right now that would make all the other things that I need to go do easier? So what's the one thing I can do right now that would make everything else I need to go do on this journey easier? Of course, all you have is now. That means this is as good a time as any. There is no such thing as a perfect time. Fact check your own thoughts. You know, it's not fair for you to just run with these beliefs. A joke I make if I was in front of the room is I would tell the audience, hey, you guys all showed up here tonight with your own BS. People would usually go, oh, what the heck's this guy talking about? That's a little harsh. And I would talk about your belief system, you know, not the BS that you thought I was talking about. And so you have to fact check your own thoughts from time to time to make sure that the story you're telling yourself is actually what's really happening out there. And so a few months ago, everyone was telling themselves, oh my gosh, rates are so high. You can't do it. Rates are way too high. Now we're telling ourselves, oh, rates are coming down or rates are really low. You do need to fact check these things because rates are different for different products. And there is peace in getting to a no. You know, the thing that I try and grind doctors on when we're working on solving a problem is there is no power in the maybe answer or the, we'll think about it. Let's wait on it. We need to either get to a no or to a yes. Now, I'm not saying we have to make rash decisions, but I am saying, hey, if the answer is a no, then that gives us power to move forward. The maybe is where you're stuck in limbo. The maybe is where you're going, oh, I don't know, it could go either way. Well, we either need to know, is it going to be a yes or is it going to be a no? And then we can make decisions and move on quicker. Now, on that note, I'll skip the slide here. Plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable, said by the great Peter Drucker. What most folks are looking for is some sort of perfect business plan, some sort of like, hey, Jonathan, can you help me come up with a business plan? And what's funny is when I was in banking, when I first started in 2007, I'm aging myself here a bit. So when I started in 2007, we used to require a business plan to be submitted. And then it got down to like a templated business plan. So the first one was like, hey, submit us a business plan. Go out, find one, create one, send back a business plan. That's a part of your loan app. Then it was like, hey, we've got a templated business plan. It's about 6 to 10 pages long, depending upon how crazy you get with it. So here's a templated business plan. And then I think my 3rd year in, we just scrapped business plans altogether. And the truth is that we didn't see any significant difference in somebody that had a crazy long business plan versus a 2-page business plan, right? But what we did notice was that having a strategic plan and a guide and some sort of maybe perhaps mentor or team around you, what should be a part of your plan, right? So plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable, and trying to anticipate what you're going to need in the future and understand how this is going to go is really, really important for your future success. So this is a formula that you can use. The first thing in the formula is, what's your outcome, and be specific about it. It can't be, just to make it generic for a second, hey, I'm going to lose weight and get in great shape. We've got to go, hey, I'm going to lose how much weight? So we got to get down to the pounds here. And we got to talk about, well, what's great shape? Is it some sort of BMI number? Is it some sort of body fat percentage number? Is it that you're going to run a half marathon or complete a full marathon or go all out and do an Ironman or something like that? God bless those folks who do the Ironman. That stuff's wild. But if you're going down that path, that has to be your specific outcome. And so one of the things that he doesn't know I'm going to say this, but to Dr. Song's credit, he goes out and takes it a step further and says, hey, I'm trying to reach 10 million in revenue across my locations by 2026. Doing that is a very, very powerful, spoken out, audible goal setting technique, where when you put that out there, for better or worse, you're kind of putting your butt on the line. Because when 2026 comes, some of us will go, hey man, how's it going? What kind of help do you need? Are you close to your goal? There are going to be some more cynical folks going, how's that going? I bet you're nowhere close, are you, Doc? Yeah, I didn't think you could do it this whole time. I thought you were nuts. You're going to have those folks out there. But the brave ones, the courageous ones, are a hell of a lot more likely to get that goal than the ones sitting back that never talk about it, that never want to put their butts on the line, that don't want to make any commitment to the goal. So the first thing is specific outcome. Dr. Song's got it. Now, he's got to have a very powerful why. Sometimes he can communicate that why to us. Sometimes he can't. What matters is it's really strong for him. It matters to him, because that's how he's going to keep going. Because sometimes, and I'm sure he would agree, the days can be short, but the months can be short, but the days can be long. You know, you get some long days ahead of you, and you get some, what's the point in this? Do I really need this? This is a lot of headache and a lot of hassle. And that is the plight of the entrepreneur. Now, the ones that stick with it and the ones that we think are successful, the ones that we see in magazines or on Instagram, of course, not everything on Instagram is true, but the folks that we look at, we'll go back to the Bezoses of the world, the folks that everybody would say, yeah, I'd consider them to be a successful entrepreneur. They had a really, really powerful why. And it can change and it can mold a bit. It can go from, hey, I just want to make a lot of money to pay my student loans, to now I have a family to take care of, to now I have my mom and dad I need to take care of, to now I have other people that rely on me to take care of them. So whatever your why is, if it's about giving back to the community, if it's about taking care of less fortunate, I'm indifferent as to what your reason is, but make sure it's a strong one, because that's what you're going to hold on to when you have those long days. Now, the next step is you need to have a strategy. And so instead of a business plan, I like to help doctors come up with a strategic plan, something that has some flexibility to it, because we'll go down a path and say, okay, well, I know I have to do these things. And then if we get a no, let's pretend the bank says, nope, not lending you $850,000 for a startup. The best you can get $750,000. Imagine if you say, well, I can't do it at $750,000. I have to have $850,000. That's it. Dream's crushed. It's over. I hope that's not the case, but that's why you have to have a strategic plan to go, okay, what if we only get $750,000? How can we pivot? How can we move? Is it still worth it? There may be some times where we say it's not worth it right now, but we're going to do these things so that it's worth it here in the near future. Maybe we reapply or we do something else. That's a generic example, but that's why, sometimes a business plan isn't dynamic enough, and a strategic plan is one that has some ebbs and flows in it. The next step is probably the most crucial, and that's consistency. I wish that we could just all go to our local gym and exercise one day a year for like 4 to 6 hours, and we all walked around in great shape and healthy as all can be, and powerful lungs, and if we wanted 6-pack abs, great, whatever. But that's not how it works. Anybody that knows a diet and exercise analogy that I'm going down the path of knows that it takes consistency. All diet and exercise plans can require you to be consistent with that. How often do you go to the gym? How often are you staying on top of your diet, etc.? So consistency is the most important piece of it. That consistency, that discipline is the most crucial component. Now, there is feedback. You have to be willing to take feedback. You have to be willing to understand that, hey, if somebody comes along who's already done what you said you want to do and looks at you and says, hey, I got to be honest with you, man, you're not taking the right steps. You're not as consistent as you think, or you're not putting enough energy into it, or the energy that you're putting into it isn't going in the right direction. You have to be willing to take some feedback. It doesn't mean that you have to be willing to take everyone's negative feedback. We all know the Howard Schultz story, the Starbucks, right? I think he got told no like over 240 times because everyone said, you're crazy. No one's going to spend $6, $7, $8 on a cup of coffee when they can make it at home for $1, $2 maximum for the most expensive coffee at the time. So you're nuts, Howard. We'll pass. And so in his book, I think it's 242 times. I could be wrong. I know it's over 240 that he was quote unquote told no by the bank to get Starbucks off the ground. And so I'm not here to say that, hey, all feedback is the feedback, that is going to be right for you, but you do have to understand and appreciate that, hey, there is feedback out there that you need to be aware of and that you might want to take into consideration. Maybe you are going down the wrong path. Maybe it isn't the best strategy to start out completely fee for service if you haven't hit certain growth metrics and you're not making certain kinds of money or you're not able to pay your loan back. So there are things to consider there. And then, of course, there's values. So what I mean by this is all this stuff here has to connect with what you value at your core. If any of this stuff is all about, I'm just here to make a lot of money or here to make a quick buck or here because I got to get the hell out of town, I'm sitting at my parents' house and I'm working down the street, or I'm working for my father's practice, or I'm working at my mother's practice and I just got to go do this thing, that fuel for the engine will run out pretty quick. That'll only motivate you so much. You have to make sure that all this stuff connects back to what you value most. And those values are different for each and every one of us in life, whether that's health and longevity, whether that's financial stability. There's all kinds of different value structures out there, but you have to make sure that all this stuff connects back to what you value. When it does, then this will be a bit of a loop. There'll be a bit of a feedback loop on this where, hey, now that it's hitting on all your values, it's going to now go right back to your specific outcome and keep driving you and keep sustaining you through this process. All right. Now, I have this quick video here, but instead of playing the video, I'm just going to walk you guys through it. And so in this video, you're going to see what's the difference between an employee versus a business owner. Okay. And the example is very simple. Both of them make $100. But if you're a W-2 employee, this is why I'm always preaching, trying to be a 1099 if your owner will let you. It also helps you create your corporation, learn how this stuff works before you're owning your own practice. And I know there's a lot of rules and regs out there today about 1099 employees, but there's still opportunities to be one. And if you can become a 1099 employee by way of your employer, then this is a bit of a refresher for you. And if you're not, then this is what it looks like. So both folks made $100. Then you pay taxes right away when you're W-2. You pay all your matching FICA, FUTA, et cetera, state of California, blah, blah, blah. Then you have $80 left over. Then you take care of your expenses. Let's just pretend it's your car note and your house and your all that stuff. And then you're left over with $5 and you paid $20 in taxes. On this side is the business owner. And I don't care if we're talking LLC, S Corp, whichever it is, made $100. And then here you are, expenses, $75. You have $25 left over. Then you pay taxes on that, both at a 20% rate. So in this example, it's easier to do it at 20%. Dr. Song might be going, it's a hell of a lot more than 20%, and that's okay. But at any rate, both are at a 20%. So you paid $5 here, whereas this person obviously paid $20. And after taxes, you have $20 left over to go spend on whatever else you want. And in this here, in these expenses, we're able to write off things like uniform expenses and car notes and other items in here. We're able to depreciate equipment that we purchased. And this is the stuff that drives people crazy when you see these, for better or worse, political headlines about, well, so-and-so doesn't pay any in taxes or doesn't pay their fair share in taxes. And this isn't a political conversation, but this is how the IRS has let businesses structure themselves accordingly, which is, hey, they technically both paid 20%, but old Bezos only paid $5. And if I'm a W-2, I paid $20. I'm going to feel slighted about that because Jeff's sitting on a multi-million-dollar yacht and I'm happy to get in my car and drive home and hopefully put gas in the tank. So these are the differences in that employee versus business owner, or in my case, I would say employee versus a CEO. So think on this when you are setting up your corporation and if you are eligible to be a 1099, but this is one of the reasons why you would go do it. This is one of the reasons why you would want to go be a business owner. because now you can start creating wealth, and if nothing else, mitigating the amount of money that you have to give back to the IRS, and understanding how money works for you and where you can put that money. So this would be a reason why some people say, hey, this is why I want to go into business ownership, so I can control my own future. Now, what's interesting is that you guys have a second version of control in your own future, which is clinical control. And you might be sitting at a place today where you don't really have much of a say. It's you're going to use this lab and this supplies. And heck, you might even, here's the gloves that you use and you might hate them. And here's the hand pieces that you get to use, and right on down to the instruments you get to use. And you might hate every single piece of that component. And so when you own your own practice, you now get clinical control as well. So kind of a nice two-pronged approach, or a win-win, if you will. All right, we're going to go past the video. So now, which path is your path? These are the business ownership models that I've identified just to make things really easy. So you can do a startup from scratch. You can do a jumpstart style practice, and that's AKA a second gen practice. Specifically, it's a practice that was built out and plumbed and equipped and probably left to kind of die on the vine, if you will. It was somebody's third, fourth, fifth office. This happened a lot during COVID. COVID hit. People had 3, 4, 5 offices. They had to pull back from those offices. They basically rerouted that patient base that was going there and pulled it maybe a little bit closer to their main office. And so now you had these offices sitting out there that had nothing but equipment, plumbing, electrical, etc. No computer system, of course. And they were just there with no patients. Some of them, they pulled the equipment out, but everything was plumbed. Everything was ready to go, and still no patients. So that would be a second gen. You could, of course, buy your practice. You could buy into a practice. You could do a partnership startup. You could do a partner acquisition. You could do an earn out, which is a structure on how to go buy a practice or take over a practice. And then you could do a merger acquisition model. So we're going to dive into some different scenarios. This is strategic advice or tactical advice on, hey, what should I do? Should I buy or start a practice? And so one of the first things I would look at is, well, have you already bought a house? So if anybody's bought a house, then you don't have to raise your hand, but just take note of that. Maybe somebody in the family gave you a house. Lucky for you. So if you have home ownership already kind of a check marked off, well, then you want to now look at demographics and inventory, because the truth is you're not going to really be able to explore much more than 60 miles away from where you live. Now, of course, if you're saying, well, I'm willing to move, I can relocate, I can pack up and go, whenever my spouse and I want to, well, then great, happy day. But most people can't do that. So owning a home requires you to look at demographics around your practice and the competition, or sorry, not around your practice, but around where you live, and the competition around where you live. And then is there inventory around where you live? And is it within 60 miles? So the challenge now is, if you've bought a house and the answer is yes, then you're probably leaning towards some version of a startup. And the reason why you're leaning towards a startup is because the demographics is going to be a hindrance for you if the demographics around your house are awful. But there's probably not a lot of inventory of practices around the area. And then you have to make sure that if there is, that it's within 60 miles from where you live, because the banks don't really approve deals longer than 60 miles or 60-minute drive. And then, of course, you want to factor in competition. How much competition is there? What's really cool about competition in this scenario is, if you live in the area, you work in the area, you have a family in the area, it should be easier for you to outmaneuver the competition, especially if that's corporate competition, because you're actually a human being that goes to the local grocery store, that frequents the local restaurants. You can connect with people where they are. Those people could be your future patients, whereas the corporate shop isn't really interested in doing that. They're popped up all over the country, all over the region. And so you can outmaneuver that competition a bit better. But if you've bought a house, you can certainly say, hey, I'm going to go try and buy a practice instead, and more power to you. But again, there probably isn't a whole lot of inventory where you are. And then if there is, are they going to quote unquote overcharge you for that because they know you're close by? So you're probably leaning towards a startup in that scenario. Now, by the way, if you can help it and you haven't bought a house yet, I would look to, believe it or not, secure a practice first and then buy a house second. So if there's any other advice there, whether you want to buy a practice or start a practice, I would look to secure the practice first and either start your journey on a startup or go ahead and buy a practice and then secure your home afterwards. Because now you don't have this anchor where the bank is going to hold you to this 60-mile radius. And they're going to say, well, hey, you found a practice, it's your dream office, but it's 75 miles away. we're going to have a tough time getting that approved. You might have to put more money down. You might have to have a co-signer. There's going to be some extra hurdles and hoops to jump through. So when I say things like, yeah, the bank may not approve it or it's going to be this, I'm just talking about the easiest, simplest path to getting an approval. Because nobody really wants to have to go put more money down than they need to. Nobody wants to have a co-signer if you don't have to. And you'd hate to put yourself in a position where, I already made some decisions. I already put myself out there. And now I'm putting myself out there. I have to now go through more hoops. I have to jump through more hurdles. And I wish I would have known sooner. So one of the things I try to avoid with every doctor I work with is this concept of, I wish somebody would have told me sooner, or I wish I would have known this sooner. Okay. Oh, let's go back. Got that covered. Great. So now here we are talking about if you're married. Are you married? Yes. Great. If you're married, if the answer is no, then hey, the world is your oyster, I guess. You could do whatever you want. No house, no marriage, you could probably go anywhere you want to. But if you are married, now you have to think about a few things. One, what's the impact to your spouse? Meaning, is it going to be harder for you to do a startup or an acquisition? What's your spouse think? How's that going to layer into it? Because both of them are going to take time and energy and effort. Where do you want to live? Where do you and your spouse want to live? Where do you want to raise your kids at school? Where do they work? Do you want to have children? Yes or no? And then, of course, is there any inventory around the area? Okay. Now, the good news is even if the answer is yes, I'm married, and this isn't a bad thing for all those folks that might be watching this that are married. I'm a married guy. I hope my wife doesn't think that I'm saying this is a bad thing. I'm saying it as it's a thing you have to think about. So when you say, okay, great, I'm married. Now, what does that mean for me? I believe you still could go down the path of acquisition or startup. You're still kind of in that space where you can decide either way, but appreciate that you are now making this decision with your spouse in mind, such that if you find a practice to purchase that is your quote unquote dream practice, you have to now consider, well, where are you going to be forced to live? Because most people want to live near where they work. And do they have good schools? And how does that impact your children? And then is it where near your spouse wants to live? Or sorry, where they work? Is where you live, where you want to practice, is it close to their work? And I will tell you something for certain, that will wear on either party if they're having to drive to and from a lot every day from work. And it's all because, well, you wanted to live near where the practice is, and your spouse still has to make, I've met folks that live in San Diego and somebody's got to drive to Orange County every day. That can be a heck of a drive. They wanted to live in San Diego because they're the practice in San Diego, but their spouse has to work in Orange County. Now, in some cases today, more than ever, we see a lot of remote work in that, but we do hear a lot in the news lately about return to office requirements or return to work, return to office mandates, maybe return to office deadlines. Perhaps I've heard a funny little acronym in there that some folks are going to be required to get their butts back in the office. And that is changing how people think about their work-life balance now, because all of a sudden, what we once thought, I'll always be able to work from home and I have ultimate flexibility, that may not be the case anymore. So if you're married, you can still go down the path of startup or acquisition, but you are having to think about these variables now before you kind of finalize your decision. I'll tell you honestly that I definitely work with some doctors and they call me and they say, hey, I want to do a startup, but I'd like to keep my options open for an acquisition. And so what that means is we might start looking at areas where a startup is viable, where we dive into the demographics of an area. We look at inventory from a commercial real estate perspective, and then we still keep the door open, if you will, for that acquisition opportunity should it come up. And that is possible to do, but of course, at some point, we're going to have to make the final decision. We're going to have to say, okay, well, we've got everything we want in the commercial real estate. Everything lines up from a startup perspective. And quite frankly, we don't really see anything coming on the market from an acquisition standpoint. So now's the time to say, hey, we're going down the path of a startup. All right. So option number one, if we talk about option number one as a startup, I have this funny little graphic here because your salary and income is not going to outweigh your stress in the beginning days. It's just how it is. You're going to have to cut back at your associate position part-time. You're going to be working your startup part-time. And the good news is that you should be able to supplement your income with your startup by the end of that first year to where you're coming out at a break even or ahead of where you are as an associate. But the bad news is there's some folks that find it pretty stressful. And so this is just an honest, kind of candid conversation. I'm obviously a big fan of startups, but they aren't for everyone. In some cases, it's about what you prioritize. So in that arena, if we look at it, I'm talking about these three scenarios when I say startup for this conversation. I'm saying you're starting from scratch, you're doing a second gen, or you're doing a partner startup. Meaning, hey, you and a buddy are going to go into this and do a startup. Now, One of the trickiest versions is the partnership startup. And not so much, I don't want to get on here and tell you, oh, well, the stats are like 80% of partnerships fail and blah, blah, blah. I think there is some truth to that. I've seen sisters as a partnership fail. I've seen fathers and sons have breakups. I've kind of seen it all in that arena. I think a lot of it has to do with just not being very clear in the beginning about who's going to be responsible for what and having that written down. So if there is a disagreement, it's, hey, we already thought through this. We already wrote this down. And it either helps you with a much cleaner breakup or it helps you avoid those conflicts altogether. It's when those things aren't thought through and then that partnership template isn't really written out. You can see that the examples I gave, well, two sisters I know that that weren't talking to each other at the time, they thought we're sisters. We don't really have to write any of this stuff down. We know, well, she'll take care of this and I'll do that. And if not, then I'll step in and she'll do that and it's all good. Or fathers and sons. Oh, well, I'll take up the slack. Or no, dad, I got it. I'll take it. It's all good. And they don't sit back and look at this as in, hey, how would two people go into this relationship as if they didn't know one another, but they did want to make a partnership work? So you really have to focus on how those things are. And that makes this the trickiest because, yes, there is a lot of talk out there about how often they fail. But I think the biggest challenge for two doctors to see when they come together is you don't grow twice as fast just because there are two of you. And in fact, the bank gives you the same startup loan for one of you or two of you. So again, because you don't grow twice as fast, they're not going to go, hey, well, and it's kind of funny, right? We're both Jonathans, but like, hey, Jonathan Song and Jonathan Miller, you're going to go do a startup together. That's great. But we're still going to give you about the same loan amount. Just because one of you wants a microscope to do endo and one of you is going to do a lot of implants and do cone beam doesn't mean we're going to just throw all this extra money at you and let you do a $1.2 million startup because you're not going to grow twice as fast or 20% faster than anyone else. We're going to assume that you grow at the same rate as anyone else. And this is the bank talking. And why would they do that? Because it's a conservative approach. Part of the secret in the bank's lending model and the thing that most banks talk about, which is, hey, we have a less than 1% default rate, is a conservative lending approach that they take with their projections and with their startup lending model. And so in that, they're not, of course, going to paint you with this brush of the, hey, you're going to go be the best dentist ever in Irvine, California, where I live. They're going to say, hey, we're just going to paint you as if you're going to be a middle of the road dentist, maybe even slightly underperforming what an average practice might do in Irvine. But we'll just kind of say, hey, an average practice on the West Coast does about this. So we'll just say you're going to do about that. Regardless of you're being in Beverly Hills, Rancho Cucamonga, Seattle, they're just going to paint you with just kind of this like slow and steady wins the race model. And if when they do that, between the bills that you have at home, like car payments and house payments, credit card payments and student loan payments, and then of course loan payments, if they paint you with this very, very conservative approach and you can afford to pay all those things, that's when they say, hey, yes, we're going to go ahead and give you the loan. Great. But it's when we bring two people to the table, both of you need to kind of now eat off the same plate. And then you both have bills and things, and somebody might have a nicer car than the other, or a nicer house than the other, or somebody might be married with a spouse that doesn't work, or all these other variables, can be a bit harder to get this one approved and or get it approved in the way that you think, which is, again, most folks think they're going to get more money or grow twice as fast. Just doesn't really work out that well. So those are tricky for those reasons, let alone all the other stuff you got to think about as a partnership goes. On the second gen side of the house, these are really cool because you can get in for a very, very much lower investment. I don't want to call it a low investment, it's still six figures, but it's a much lower investment than, let's say, 700 to 800K, which is about where the typical startup is from an investment standpoint with the bank loan. So let's say you can get into a second gen space for 300 to 350K. That's great. There are some big challenges and you're trading. So in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about some version of, hey, you're either going to spend money or more money to get back time, or you're going to spend time because you don't have a lot of money. And the worst case scenario is you spend a lot of time and a lot of money, and that's when we go, oh, well, I got ripped off. This is a giant waste. And so in this version, you get to save money in this process, but you also now lose that luxury of time because you have to think about the landlord isn't going to give you a lot, if any, TI allowance money. They're probably not going to give you a lot or any free rent because they're going to go, what's the big deal? It's ready. There is no permitting, no construction, no anything like that. It's plug and play, man. It's walk in and get going. Now, you might be able to argue that I got to change some equipment out. I got to do some different things. And so maybe you get 3 months of free rent and time to get the doors open. But now, as Dr. Song would know, 3 months isn't a lot of time. You got to hire a team, market a practice, come up with a brand and a logo and launch a website, and then have enough energy and outflow, if you will, in the marketing arena to tell the world that you're about to open the doors. And that's best served when you have time on your side. It's kind of like planting a tree and then throwing Miracle-Gro and seeds, or water to the seeds and sunlight and everything else, and hoping that it grows faster. It takes time for proper growth. And so you do lose that with a second gen. And so I like these as much as anything else. It's more about just creating awareness tonight. Again, information over affirmation on, hey, does this make sense for you? It could make sense for you, but appreciate that now you're going to have to put a lot of energy and a lot of effort in a short amount of time in order to see results quickly. A lot of folks think, well, I only spent $350, so wouldn't that be easy? You still have a $8,000 a month rent payment. You know, that's the average rent going right now in Southern Cal. You still have staff overhead at one of the highest rates in the country. You're still going to have all these things that require you to spend money and invest, and you have a lot less time to do it. And so then, of course, in something like a scratch start or just a traditional practice, I would say that you need about 12 months to get the doors open. Could be a little bit less than that. Rarely is it more than that. But the biggest variable in that arena, and I know Dr. Song has had folks on here before talking about real estate, you know, finding that right space is one of the most crucial components of getting your startup off the ground the right way. And of course, the time it takes you to do it. And so there are situations where, you know, you're trying to find the right space and you can, I don't want to go into what those guys did, but there's versions of over negotiating and then waiting too long and then all these other things that come up with that. So that finding the space component is the variable at which I can help somebody open up in 6 months or 12 months. You know, how long does it take us to find the space and then negotiate the lease and get through all those components before we can actually start building it out? In general terms, if someone called me today and said, hey, I want to go down the path of a startup, I haven't really done anything yet, but I know that I'm committed to that path, I think I can get you open in about 12 months, maybe a little bit less if everything aligns. So this is a SWOT analysis. Any business 101, and my degree is a business marketing degree, will give you this SWOT analysis as an example and as an exercise to work through things. And so these are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strengths, it's your decisions when you're doing a startup. It's all on you, for better or worse, but it's your decisions. You have a say. This thing goes however you want it to go. It's a win-win equity. It's you're investing in yourself and in your most valuable asset. It's for you. It's for your career. It's for your future, your family's future. And again, I think you have a little bit of this time is on your side. Because we haven't talked about acquisition yet, but when you do go down the path of practice acquisition, you're kind of jumping into a race car that's already going around the track at, 100, 200 miles an hour. There isn't really a whole lot of ramp up time like there is with the startup. There isn't a whole lot of training wheels. There's a, hey, you're in the deep end now and there aren't really any floaties and you got to learn how to swim real fast. So you have time on your side with a startup. And this sometimes is more valuable maybe to a female doctor who's listening tonight, where you're thinking about family and planning. I've worked with probably more female doctors than I can count that have had a child while we're in startup mode. We're in a project and we've got 12 months to build out, and month 3 or 4, they're like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm due any day now. And it's like, okay, no problem, all manageable. We can work through it, but we have that time on our side. It's much harder when it's, hey, I'm due any day now, and we're going to close on a practice doing $1.5 million, in annual revenue in a week or two. It's like, oh boy, we probably want maternity leave, and the team and everyone's going to be looking at you going, well, who's running this thing? Because we need a dentist here. You bought it and old Dr. So-and-so left, or you have to keep old Dr. So-and-so around, even though you already purchased it, which is a bit of a tricky endeavor. So those are just 3 quick hits on strengths. Weaknesses, of course, fear of the unknown. There's no proven practice team. And there's, of course, cash and cash flow. You can be really tight on cash, and then cash flow can be a bit of a moving target in the early days of a startup. And I kind of take a deep dive. One of my gripes about consultants as a whole, if I paint myself in this generic brush here, is that a lot of us get a bad reputation because we just sit here and talk about kind of strategy and maybe philosophy. It's a little bit ethereal, and I try and be as strategic as possible. Maybe it's from my banking days, or maybe it's from my marketing degree with wanting to kind of look at analytics and comparables and all those things. But I show every doctor I work with a budget calculator to show them exactly where I think we're going to invest all this money so that they can get started off as quickly as possible. We walk through projections. I have a strategic calculator where we walk through, here's how many patients we would need to see each month at this kind of production per visit model, so that we know we're going to hit all the goals that we need to hit, just enough to make sure we pay all the bills that we need to pay. And then we build from our cash flow from those models. But of course, cash and cash flow would be a weakness to a startup as opposed to an acquisition. Opportunities, of course, are growth. you're doing nothing but focusing on growth from day one. At least when I look at it, I want to have the doctors I work with so prepared as we go through the process of opening doors that the only thing you have to focus on is, hey, this thing just goes up and to the right from day one. So it grows. Fulfillment. I think there's a ton of fulfillment in creating. Now, that could be my own personal belief. And so maybe I'm kind of putting that on you tonight, but I do see a lot of doctors feel a lot of fulfillment when they say, hey, I had this idea or this vision or this thing that I wanted to create. And now I'm seeing that come into reality. I'm seeing my name on the door, my logo on the signage. Patients are coming in and saying, hey, thank you so much for how you treated me, for how you took me out of pain, for how you kept me out of pain. There's a lot of fulfillment there. And then I think that you have more options when you're doing a startup. You know, when you're buying a practice, you're buying whatever they had. This is the deal. Yes, you can make changes and you can start to implement and make your own influence, but you have more options in a startup to make it yours from day one. Threats, competition, everyone knows that. Bank lending options can be a threat to the degree that there may not be a lot of bank lending options based on your profile, based on what you want to do, where you are in the country. You know, rental rates can really come in and bite you in the butt in certain markets, and so can construction costs. So bank lending options can be a bit of a threat because you only have one or two options. You don't have all the options. And then the other one is decisions that you've made. You know, you could have made some bad decisions before you went down this path, and now you're kind of going, well, this is gonna be my bed. I guess I'm gonna have to sleep in it now. You know, I made it, and I got to sleep in it, so to speak. So there are some decisions that you have made that could be threats to your own practice growth and capability. All right. So who's paying for it? What's the right budget? How much do you apply for? This is something that I want to make sure everyone has access to tonight. So this is a Dr. Sample by design. I don't really know a Dr. Sample. I put some items to consider here on the right side. So this is a Google, it's in Google Drive. It's an active worksheet. And I just went ahead and laid it out for you and said, hey, this is about how far $700,000 will go. Now, you'll notice in my example, I do have a TI allowance built in here. And what you can't see that you will be able to see in the Excel sheet if you reach out to me and ask for it is you're going to see here that this is a price per square foot calculator. And then this is that same thing. So this is a 2,200 square foot office at about $220 per square foot, which is my average cost for construction. Now, this is a number across the US. So in certain markets, it gets higher or lower. If you wanted to look at Southern California, you can get it for as low as 200. It can certainly go up to $250 a square foot or beyond. Now, anytime you go out into the world and make those kinds of claims, you're going to always have people that come back and kind of go, well, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's $320 a square foot in Southern California. Be careful who you're listening to, right? Because every contractor that were to see, let's pretend there's a bunch of contractors on here seeing this, they'd laugh because they're all going to try and get it as high as they possibly can. Not to take advantage of you, of course, but to just say, hey, look, the truth is if you had $300 a square foot to spend, I can build whatever the heck you want, whatever kind of style practice you want. But on the flip side, one of my jobs is to kind of keep everything in check, right? Is to also keep you away from hurting yourself such that we all can get wrapped up in a really expensive suit, let's say, right? My wife says I probably have too many suits or suit jackets, too many blazers, right? And so I probably never met a blazer I don't like. I'm like, oh, I kind of like that one. I kind of have one like it, but maybe a different color, et cetera, et cetera. My point is that we can get wrapped up in this. Ooh, well, that one looks really nice. Ooh, that looks really nice too. But we've all got a budget at the end of the day. And so in some cases, you spend too much on our blazer. And I hope I get good use out of it. And I hope people like it when I wear it. But there's another component of this stuff that, like, especially in construction, it's hard sometimes because you'll spend good money on certain things and nobody will ever notice. I kind of equate it to the fancy haircut. You went and got a $100 haircut, a $200 haircut, and then you're walking around and people are looking at you and you're like, yeah, you notice anything different? And they're like, I don't know. Did you get a new blazer or did you, why don't you lose some weight? And you're like, no, I got a $200 haircut, man. Didn't it look cool? And they're like, oh, it kind of looks like the old haircut, but I guess. That's like the worst thing you can hear, but sometimes that's how it goes. And so I say the same thing can happen in dentistry, where we can invest too much money in certain areas that patients will have no idea about, and then leave areas out that will absolutely impact us. And so as you can see, our construction costs are much more significant than our total equipment costs between core equipment, office furniture, and IT costs for all your computers, monitors, low voltage, et cetera. That's about $203,000 in my budget. And I've got a massive number in construction because at the end of the day, in my example here, I'm building out 2,200 square feet. So just by volume, the cost is the cost. If I was only $150 a square foot, but I was building out 3,000 square feet, it would balloon up on me pretty quickly. So I put in cabinetry, attorney's fees, signage. I have a TI allowance in here. I have some permit fees in here, and I have working capital costs, and that comes out to 700. You can get to go in here and play with this as much or as little as you want. I tried to put these assumptions in here just to keep you kind of close to reality, because if you think you're gonna, I don't know, go out and do a startup for much less than 700K, it's probably not going to happen. There's a reason why the banks are lending $700,000 to $800,000 between general practitioners and specialists, and that's because that's what it costs. When I started in banking, a $400,000, $450,000 loan was like a lot of money. We were like, holy smokes. And to be honest with you, pre-COVID, we were seeing 600, 650 was like a whoa. And then post-COVID, almost instantly, a few things happened. One thing that happened that really opened my eyes up that dentistry was going to be okay was going into COVID, there were really two banks that would lend to any startup or first-time buyer all over the country. Okay. I don't want to say what they are, but one has a W and F and one has a B and an A. And those are the two banks all over the country that were doing it, right? Now, today, both those two banks still exist, but there's like another 2 or 3, maybe 4 banks out there that would lend to you, whether you're starting or buying a practice anywhere in the country. And the reason why that made me feel great about where dentistry was going was because those banks wouldn't be entering the industry if they thought it wasn't good. They would have just pulled out. They had every excuse to pull out. They had every excuse to pull back and say, oh, COVID this and it messed up that and dentistry is no good. And so we'll just pull back. So the great thing is that more banks came out, and that also then increased competition, and that raised the level at which banks are willing to lend. And what else we've seen, the third component, if you will, is we haven't seen default rates go up any higher. As you lend more money and you lend to more doctors, you might think, well, we're going to start to see an increase in default rates, and default rates have still stayed at less than 1% for at least any lender that I know of that's consistently lending to startups. So if you talk to a bank, and this is a sidebar, this is not part of the presentation, but this is my own version here. If you're talking to a bank and they need a lot of money down, a lot of extra paperwork and business plans and co-signers and mortgages on your house and all that stuff, you're probably not talking to the right bank, or it's just too much to get you approved right now. It means that most of the other banks must have said no, and you're kind of down to one of the only lenders left that will lend you money. And so if you have to give up all this stuff to make your startup happen, you might be in a position where, you know what, it's just not the right time. It's just too much going on. Either maybe too much in your own personal financial history. Perhaps you could improve your credit score. Perhaps you can improve yourself as a borrower, or you might just be asking for too much money. You've set up a project where you want to buy the building or do ground up construction and the square footage, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, it's just too much. So be very careful, because I think there's always a bank out there that will lend you money, but there's certain ones that are responsible with how they lend, and certain ones that are just like, I'm here to lend money. I make more money the more I lend to you, so let me lend you as much as you can handle. That's a scary endeavor. All right. So obviously you want to build your project team. This is a crucial step. So we talked about who's going to pay for it? The bank should pay for it. The bank should be able to bankroll the entire operation, and you should have the budget to do it. And that calculator is a way for you to see where and how you should invest your money. I do think that where do you spend your time and energy is a component of how you're able to delegate tasks. One of the things that most doctors don't know is what are the steps to the process. You guys know, how to do a crown and what to do for it and how to remove decay and build up, et cetera. But in that same version of this, there's a process to doing a startup the right way. And one of the secrets to saving money is actually saving time. And you save time by knowing what things need done and how long it takes each thing to get done. And so through that, then okay, well, now I have my deadlines and my timeline set up. And now I know I can go through this process in a strategic manner where if I'm saving myself time, then I'm really saving myself money. And so that's something that I outline for doctors based on when they say, hey, here's what kind of practice I want to have, and here's when I want to open my doors, et cetera. Then I start to build that timeline for them. And then I'm giving them deadlines to say, okay, we have to make a decision by this date for this thing to happen. We have to, get through the bank lending stuff by this date. We have to sign our leases. We have to, all these things go through the process. But building your project team is a crucial component. And I don't think enough doctors spend time on that. They kind of just take the people that are right in front of them. In some cases, it's okay. You don't really know where to go find these people, but there's a lot of folks out there that will tell you, oh, I've got a friend who's a contractor, and I've got a friend who's a commercial real estate person. I've got all these friends. You really want to make sure that you're picking the right people for you and not just the first person, the first option that was thrown your way. So here's who should be on that team. A CPA, there's a timing to get done the CPA, but yes, you should have a CPA. There should be an attorney. There should be some sort of financial advisor, and I have insurance here because most of these folks are going to offer you life and disability products that you might need for your bank loan to get closed and done. And or if nothing else, you're going to want life and disability insurance as you go to take on a large endeavor like this, where you're going to set yourself up for your future and for your family's future, and you want to make sure you're properly insured. I do think you need some sort of mentor or coach. And then you can take that one of two ways. You can either say, well, yeah, Jonathan, you're talking about yourself and self-serving, but I also think you need a clinical mentor. You need somebody there that you can go to at least go through the process on the clinical side when you say, hey, I had a patient say this. I saw this weird case. How do I handle that? If you want to lump it in there that, hey, I'm saying you need a business coach or a business advisor, you can. But in general terms, I'm here to work with the doctors that want to do it the way that I see the world and kind of believe in the same things that I believe. And I certainly have folks that go, I could do it on my own. I'm all good. And you certainly can take a run at it without me. Plenty of doctors have. So either way, you can either say that's a coach consultant person, but I really believe this is more of a mentor type person, somebody that's a clinical aspect side. You of course need a bank financing source. You need an equipment company. You need a contractor. You need a space finder or commercial real estate broker. Now I have contractor / architect. This is a bit of a tricky component. And again, you're going to have some folks push back on this concept. You do need a contractor to build it, and you do need an architect to have a stamped set of plans to submit to the city to get you a permit. What you do not need, and this goes in my top 10 mistakes that you'll see later on, you do not need to go to an architect that's going to charge you 30 or 40 or 50K to design this office to then go to a contractor that says, well, wait a minute, this plan and design you gave me is awesome and it's beautiful. I got to be honest with you, but it also ain't $250 a square foot anymore. This is more like $320 a square foot. And you're going to go, oh, well, I don't have the budget for $320 a square foot. And they're going to go, well, that's what your architect designed. So we can either scrap this design and go back to what you have the budget for, let's say $250 a square foot, or we can stick with this and you can find a way to come up with more money. As you can imagine, I'm going to tell you that finding a way to come up with more money to build some super fancy, awesome startup is not the best use of your investment. I think that there are certain things that you do want to invest in, and quality construction can go a very, very long way. But the difference is, what's quality? What do you value? And then what a patient's going to value? What I find most often is it's about the clinical aspect of it and the clinical technology that you have. And then, of course, the experience that's delivered by the team that you hire that really gets those patients to say, this was awesome. And I'm going to tell all my friends and family, and I'm going to keep coming back for years to come. Or this was not awesome, and it was a giant waste of my time, and I'm never going to see you again. So be careful on this one, because yes, you need a contractor. And yes, you need an architect's set of plans or a stamped set of plans. But full disclosure, I just have a hard time coming to terms with those folks that are charging you on the low end, $20,000. More frequently, I see things in the $30,000 to $40,000 range before you've really gotten anything from the contractor as far as what's it going to cost to build it. And I'll tell you, there's good architects out there. There's good designers out there. Most of the time, they're very willing to play within your budget. And so if I said, well, okay, Dr. Song, you've got a budget for $5 per square foot for flooring. Okay. And I'm going to go easy math on this. And so, okay, you say, well, I talked to my designer and we're going to stay within the $5 per square foot for flooring. So that's great. But most often what happens is you and the designer go out and pick something that's in that range, but you didn't factor in the labor costs of what that something is. And your contractor was factoring in labor costs when they gave you $5 per square foot for flooring. And so when you go pick a really fancy floor that requires more labor, it's more labor intensive, then it costs more to install it. And so you always have those two costs. You have material cost plus labor cost. Most designers aren't good at understanding what the labor costs are. So be cognizant of that. There are good designers out there, and there's a difference between an architect who's going to do plans to get you permits, and then there's interior designers, more or less, right? Those folks that might pick, like in Dr. Song's background, he's got that wood slat. So somebody's going to go pick that for you and help you decide, well, what's that material going to be made out of? Is that going to be oak? Is that going to be some sort of prefabricated material? A designer would help you pick that stuff. So there's a difference between an architect and designer. Now, you've got option number 2 would be to purchase. I have this up here because immediately when you purchase, you are the CEO. You're walking in the door and now you're the head honcho. You're the one in charge. And so when I say purchase, we're really talking about one of these versions. We're obviously talking about buying your practice outright, buying into a practice, a partner acquisition, an earnout model, or a merger acquisition model. So that's, well, for this context, or this is our business ownership models of practice acquisition. Basically, these are all the other versions that aren't exactly a startup. Now, I will say you can buy a practice that's quote unquote buying a practice that is more, if there's a spectrum, so to speak, where one side of the spectrum is an acquisition where it's cash flowing, it's got patients coming in every day, it's got new patients coming in the door every month, it's got team, it's got all those things figured out, versus startup. And there's a bit of a spectrum here. You can buy a practice that's a lot more on the startup side of the spectrum than it is on cash flowing and patients every day and all those things. So SWOT analysis on this, you've got your strengths, your confidence. You get confidence from having that practice there. It's a proven entity. It's a proven concept. You have cash flow and you have a team. Your weaknesses, are you taking over someone's bad habits? Are you taking on something where this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we'll keep doing it? Those are what I call bad habits. And now you have no guarantees in this, right? You have no guarantees on the goodwill coming over. There is no such thing as yeah, absolutely, the goodwill is going to come and no issues, no worries. In fact, I would argue, and this might be a hot take, but I would argue that a fee-for-service practice is one of the hardest practices to transition and take over that goodwill. Because if you're walking into a scenario where it's truly fee-for-service, where we're truly saying, hey, people walk in off the street and hand over their credit card or their cash and no insurance required whatsoever, they're doing that for Dr. Song. And then when Dr. Miller comes in, they're going, well, I was willing to pay for him, but I don't have a clue who you are. And I don't know you. I don't have the trust with you. So I'm not really willing to just fee for service this thing with you. That's a very, very tough conversation to have. And it's one of the hardest versions to transition. The double whammy with that is, what do all practice brokers tell you about a fee for service practice? It's the best thing ever. It's the best practice you can get. There's no insurance. There's no problem. There's none of that stuff. Insurance is a nice little safety net when you're in a transition, because not really a whole lot's changed. And now what do most patients do? They judge a book by its cover. So when you've changed the cover of that book, meaning the owner of that book, and then you're saying, hey, I'm expecting you to keep coming in and paying with your cold hard cash, it's a really, really tough request. So then there's a conflicting guidance in that as well. There's conflicting guidance from both staff, practice brokers, the former owner. You're going to get a lot of what I call conflicting ideas. You know, I'm going to pay top dollar for this, but it's one of the toughest transitions there is. Those are hard things to wrap your head around. Opportunities, again, there's opportunities for growth. I think there isn't a practice out there that's for sale that doesn't have room for growth. Otherwise, why would it be selling? You also get fulfillment out of it. Don't get me wrong. It's a different kind of fulfillment, but you still get fulfillment out of practice ownership one way or the other. And you can capitalize on efficiencies. Most offices that are selling have kind of more or less just started to relax a little bit on their efficiencies. They're not exactly keeping up with everything. They're not keeping the axe sharp, so to speak. Abraham Lincoln has a famous quote: if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe. Right? So in that efficiencies game, when you're buying an established practice, most of the time the axe isn't as sharp as it could be. So you have some opportunities there to create more efficiencies. Threats, competition again, bank lending options again. And then this time it's not decisions that you've made, but it's of course the decisions that were made for you. Decisions made for you are just the people that they hired, the marketing companies they chose, the practice management software they took on. No, I don't know if anybody's working with this software, but if you're working in a practice right now with like Soft Dent or Easy Dental, ugh, goodness gracious, you are in the dark ages, man. And there are a lot of practices out there that still have that software, and it's archaic and very antiquated. And it's really hard to do an analysis as someone who looks at practices and say, hey, if it's a good investment or not. It's harder for a guy like me to do an analysis on a practice when you have that really old software. Now, it can be done, but when you buy a practice with that old software, yeah, of course, we say, well, you just change it. It's also a very hard endeavor to just change it. It's not easy. It's not easy to go to the DMV and get a new license. You wait in the back of the line and you take a number, man. And then, hey, I hope they get to me someday. So when you're trying to transfer out of that old practice management software, that can be a decision that was made for you and nothing really you can do but kind of go, okay, I got to live with this now. Sometimes I got to suffer through this. So that's the threats in a practice acquisition. Acquisition team, there's some differences, but not a lot. I say a consultant outright in an acquisition team because you have to have somebody that's going to go look at this thing for you. If you're just going to go out into the world and say, I'm going to buy a practice and I'm going to listen to the practice broker and I'm going to listen to my attorney and my bank, those folks are looking out for you, but they're only looking out for you to the degree that they can. The bank isn't there to really go and dive into the practice details to say, hey, here's how the hygiene's performing. Did you know the hygiene department's good or terrible? Or, hey, did you know that they're not collecting copays? Banks don't know that stuff. Probably good they don't know some of that stuff. But there are certain things there that they can't look at. They don't know what to look for to talk about the health of a practice. What they do look at is the financials. And so they can look at a P&L and a tax return and say, hey, this practice is good or not good based on how the financials are. But it's a real son of a gun if you buy a practice and all of a sudden you realize they weren't charging copays and you go, well, that's illegal. So we're going to start doing the legal thing and charge copays. And then all of a sudden the patients go, well, what? Old Dr. Song, he never charged copays. What are you trying to rip me off? And you're going, no, I'm trying to do the right thing. This is, imagine trying to say what old Dr. Song did was illegal. They love that guy. And that guy was the best. So you can't really come out and say that either. So all of a sudden you're the bad guy. So there's certain things there that you have to have somebody go in and help you look at. So I just come right out and say, hey, you got to have a consultant or somebody who's going to go to bat for you, because here's the other thing. The seller has a practice broker. And believe it or not, while I'm considered a buyer's advocate, and some people think that I'm adversarial with practice brokers, it is a much easier, much cleaner deal to get done with a practice broker involved. Because when you just have a seller on the other side, they get to make up the rules as they go. It's like, for anybody that has kids on this, I have a 6-year-old son. We're into board games now. And let me tell you, his name is George. George can make up the rules on you in a minute. He'll all of a sudden go, nope, that's not how we play. We don't play like that anymore. Now I win because I did this or I moved that. And it's hard to tell George, no, those aren't the rules, buddy. That's not. And he's like, yeah, that's how I want to play. I want to play this way. A seller is the exact same way when there's no one keeping them in check. At least a practice broker can go, look, you hired me to give you advice to help you get a deal done. This is the steps to the process we have to follow. Yes, we have to submit financials to the bank. Yes, we have to give them an updated P&L. Yes, we have to submit data out of the practice software. When you're working with a seller who has no one to advise them or no one who they're listening to, then they're a lot like my 6-year-old, and they get to make up the rules as they go. And if they go, I don't want to give you that stuff. I don't want to do that. Or I don't think that's even, you don't need that, do you? Nah, you don't need that. All of a sudden you're kind of stuck. And it's a bummer because you're going, well, I see an avenue here, an opportunity here to get this done, but I just can't get the thing done because they won't play by the rules. It's really, really frustrating. So now you know how it feels when you play games with my 6-year-old. Really frustrating some days. All right. This is something else. So I wanted to make sure everyone had access. There's no audio to this. I want to make sure everyone had access to a calculator tool, a budget tool for a startup. Then I also want to make sure everyone had access to what I would consider my buyer's acquisition checklist. This is just a giant checklist for all the things that I think you need to go get done when you're buying a practice. I've got boxes there titled buyer and seller for what the buyer is responsible to make sure is done versus what the seller is responsible to make sure is done. Some of those things you're both going to be responsible to make sure gets done. But it's really to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks on you. Because again, with the seller representing themselves or a broker representing the seller, they're going to show you what they think you want to see and not exactly what you need to see or what you need to know. And in some cases, I'll occasionally get a doctor that go, well, what do you do? You're a consultant like any other consultant. What's the difference? And I go, look, I've never been another consultant's customer, but I can tell you one of the things that I believe in is part of my job is to tell you what you need to know, even if it's not what you want to hear. And so in some cases, it may be you need to know this practice is a bad investment. You shouldn't buy it. I know you didn't want to hear that because you've been looking now for 6 to 12 months, and this is the first thing you've seen that's in a 5-minute drive from your house, and it's got all the things you want. But I got to be honest with you, this is not something I think you should buy. Or sometimes it's, hey, a startup isn't right for you right now. You're about to have your 3rd child. Your spouse doesn't work. I had this, by the way. I had a doctor who had 6 children at home, and he couldn't find anything to buy. So he said, I'm going to do a startup. And I said, Doc, you're not going to do a startup. You're not going to do it. Okay. There's too much going on. You have 6 children at home. Your spouse doesn't work. The amount of time it takes you to get into a financial position that you're in today as an associate is too long. And you're going to hate me if I say, oh yeah, let's go do a startup anyway. Now we did find a practice to purchase. He believed in what I was saying. We found something doing a little over $2 million. Unfortunately, he probably checks in with me once, twice a year and says, hey, thanks so much for talking me into this, because I'm so glad I didn't do that startup. My wife would have probably left me. You know what I mean? There's a lot of work when you buy a $2 million practice, and there's a lot of work when you do a startup from scratch. But at least in that scenario, we could see a direct line of sight on, hey, you will have enough money coming in the door from day one to take care of your family. And obviously, when you're a guy with 6 kids and married, that's got to be one of your important values. That's got to be one of the things that matters to you most. So this is a buyer's checklist that, so for anybody watching this evening that is like, hey, I don't know if a startup's my cup of tea, it might be an acquisition, shoot me a message and let me know. So I want to make sure you get a copy of this. Okay, let's get past that. All right, so career goals. This is another thing to think about when you're going to go down the path of acquisition or startup. One of your career goals is multiple practice ownership. Then I think you should be focused on buying. I think you should be focused on buying over starting up. I think that at least your first practice, you should buy it. Your second practice, your third practice, could you do a startup? Could you do a second gen jumpstart style deal? You absolutely could. You also could do a merger acquisition for office 2 or 3 or 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I do think that that first one, if you want to do a multi-practice, should be to purchase. Because when you want to do multi-practice, you have these goals, you have these ambitions, and you have this kind of fuel to your fire for a period of time. But if you're doing a startup and it takes you a little longer to get it off the ground, then it's going to push everything else that much further out. And it's going to push all your career goals that much further out. If you buy a practice with good cash flow, let's say you buy something doing, let's run some simple numbers. Average practice, average GP practice in America today is generating somewhere between 750 and 800,000 in revenue. Okay. Now that's average across the country. Some are more or less depending upon where you are. Now you look at a market like Southern California, and let's just go with a $800,000 practice. Immediately you have some factors here that hurt your scenario, your odds for profitability, because of how high rent is, how high staff overhead is, just cost of living, just how expensive everything is. And I'm not saying that because, oh, woe is us that have chosen to live in Southern Cal. I think we have a great opportunity here. But the truth is that an $800,000 practice here doesn't go nearly as far as an $800,000 practice in Ohio, which is where I'm originally from. And so what you should look at is, if you're looking to buy a practice, $800,000 in revenue, you should see about $240,000 from what we call a seller discretionary earnings level, or just good old fashioned, we can call it profitability if you want to. But by the time I add in those variables like officers' compensation, profits, I add back car expenses and some of those specific items in the practice, I should get about $240,000 or so. That's a roughly 30% profit margin on all those items in that practice. Now, if you take that same practice and you say, well, 240 is awesome, or maybe you think 240 is terrible, dude. I'm making 300 grand as an associate right now. Why would I do that? Well, so you take that $800,000 practice and you get it to $1 million or $1.2 million, right? It's much easier to take something at 800 and get it up to $1 million or $1.2 million than something at 0 to $1.2 million. So if you take something that's at 800 and you're at 30% profitability, if you can figure out your economies of scale and build in your efficiencies, then every single dollar past 800 should be a much more profitable dollar. And so now on that million or that $1.1 million or that $1.2 million, you should start to tip the scales and go past 30% profits to 35 or even 40% profitability. And so now something at $1.2 million at 40% profits is doing 480. If you're doing 480, I promise you, there won't be a bank out there that says, oh no, we don't want you to get a second office. They'll say, where and how much? Where do you want to buy it and how much do you want for it? And the truth is that the other piece of this is, when you want to do multi-practice, inevitably, the first practice you buy is going to supplement practice number 2, at least for a short period of time. You know, when you do that second practice, it's going to pull you away from the first one, and you're going to have more time and more attention, more energy to get practice number 2 going. Now, yes, you might buy something practice number 2 that's doing $1 million or $1.2 million, but more often than not, you're probably going to buy something practice number 2 doing 500, 600, 700K and saying, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get this thing to $1 million or $1.2 million. But in that interim phase, in that time it takes you to grow practice number 2, practice number 1 is going to be supplementing that thing. It's going to be helping you pay the bank loan, helping you pay yourself, and helping you pick up any shortfalls in practice number 2. So in essence, when you take 1 and add 2, in some cases, number 1 declines a little bit. Only declines not so much from a revenue standpoint, but from a profit standpoint, because it's going over here to pay for some of the bills on this one. Dr. Song is shaking his head like, I've seen that firsthand. That's just how it is. So that's why I say, if multi-practice ownership is part of your deal, you probably need to buy that first practice, not do a startup. If you want balance, you want work-life balance, you want time on your side, you want time with friends, with family, you want time out for children, I say you should do a startup. I say that you've got time and decisions on your side in that scenario, where the more time you have, the better decisions you get to make. So if you're looking at, hey, I really want to focus on not just being a dentist and that's my sole thing day in and day out, I think that your first practice, this is a first practice, right, by the way, but the first practice you do should probably be a startup. You've got time to get the doors open, so you're not accelerated or under a lot of pressure. And then you've got time to make decisions about what your family life looks like, what happens there. And also, you get a lot of breaks, if you will. You get a lot of benefits to being a first-time owner when you do a startup. The bank structures your loan in the beginning on a graduated payment plan, kind of a lot like an IBR, income-based repayment plan. A lot of times you can negotiate with your landlord where your rent takes a step up because you're telling your landlord, hey, look, I'm just getting started. I can't pay full rent from day one. Can I get my first year's rent maybe at a 20, 30% discount? And then year two, it goes up a little bit. Year three, it goes up a little bit. So you get some really nice buffers, kind of like going to the bowling alley and they put those little bumpers on the side. So you can, have a much, much better chance of hitting a strike. You get those built in when you do a startup. So if work-life balance is a goal of yours, I would consider doing a startup. Now, if family is a goal of yours, hey, I have no family. I'm single. I'm running around town. I think you can go either way. You just got to decide, hey, what's the kind of commitment that you need to make and how's that going to go? I would make this decision around family, if you will. I would say, hey, what kind of family do I want to have? Am I just getting started in my family journey? Does my family support me? What's going on? I do think you could buy it or build it. I think you could start it or you could acquire it. It just depends on what your goals are around family. So work-life balance for me is a little different than family. Family is one component of it because obviously in some cases, like the example I gave, you could have a family already, 6 kids and a spouse that doesn't work. Well, then I think you know that you need to buy a practice. But if you're saying, hey, I'm just getting started, I'm engaged, I don't have a lot of family left, a lot of family yet, then I think you can go down the path of acquisition. You don't have to go into acquisition mode. You can decide. I look at work-life balance as, while there's a family component in there, some folks are just like, I don't want to be nothing but a dentist all day. I want time for mission trips. I want time for my church group. I want time for my family back east. I want other things to do with my life than just be a dentist all day. That was my example in the work-life balance part. This is more about, hey, do I need to take care of my family? Do I have any family at all that I'm, creating right now, building right now, those kinds of things. In the end here, I'll focus on the top 10 mistakes I see. The first one I see all the time, and I have a bit of a story about this. I was in a room one time full of pediatric dentists. It was a good mix of male, female. It was honestly 11 people. It was 6 guys, 5 girls. And they were in their pediatric residency down at Rady's in San Diego. And I asked, hey, who, by show of hands, who's going to go out and do a startup? And I promise you, every single guy in the room raised their hand real loud and proud, like, I want to start up. I want to start up. And only one girl, she kind of like maybe raised her hand. She was kind of like, maybe, kind of. And I kind of stopped. And I remember the professor that had me in was like, wait, why'd you stop the presentation? I said, well, I just got to find this out for my own benefit. Why is it that all the guys raised their hand and only one girl out of the 5 said, yeah, maybe? And the guys all went around the room and said, well, I already know I got to focus on profits, cut down costs, and really run efficiencies in a lean team and really maximize production per visit. I said, okay, that's one way to do it, of course. But to the one girl that raised her hand, why is it that you kind of did maybe? And she goes, well, because I don't really think about those same things that all the guys just said. I think about patient experience, how much time do I have with them? Where am I going to put them on their oral health journey? That kind of thing. And I said, well, to be honest with you, that is the better business model. That will serve you much more long-term than grinding people down on expenses, focusing on how much production you can do in a single visit and how much profit you can make per patient. Those are, of course, metrics that businesses need to look at, but those shouldn't be, in my opinion, the metrics that businesses operate on. You know, look at those things and be aware of those things, but you shouldn't operate on those things. So my first mistake is this ego-driven, like, well, I'm right. I already know the answers. I already got all this figured out. I've already got it. That'll be a recipe for disaster. The second thing is the budget. The reason why I include the calculator or that budget tool is because most doctors don't know how they're going to invest the money properly. There is very much there's a right way and a wrong way to invest. And so there's that age old, at least in business school, that I think every professor probably tells the same story. And that story is some version of like, hey, every year we give kids $1,000 and we put them in this mock investment program. And Only a handful of kids will walk out of here with like their account balance growing to like $1 million from 1,000. And most of you guys will go broke and lose money and borrow too much money and run in the negative. And that's just because you don't know the right investments to make in that mock example. And the same thing happens when you're going down a practice startup, is that you're not really sure what the budget's supposed to be. So therefore, all numbers are either big, crazy numbers, or sometimes we go, oh, well, so what? I'll borrow more money. I'll invest in this technology. I'll spend top dollar on this. There is no such thing as cost or budget. The truth is if you're focused on understanding the budget and the right way to invest your money, you're automatically much more ahead of the curve on how to be a profitable practice when the time comes, because you're now setting the bar. The more money you borrow and the wrong investments you make, then that bar for profitability is just getting higher and higher. It's harder to get to profitability. If you understand that, hey, I understand I have a budget, I understand overhead costs are a real thing, and I'm going to make investments with my money that either give me back time or increase my case acceptance, patient experience type stuff, then that hurdle for profitability is much lower. The third mistake is the lender. Yes, low rates matter, but it is certainly not the only thing, especially in today's world. When we're in a world today where the lending is one of the most competitive landscapes I've ever seen, and I was in lending for 10 years, if you missed the intro, the rate will be one of the lowest, most competitive rates you're going to get just by way of competitive nature. But that doesn't tell you nearly the whole story about the relationship that you're going to build with that lender. And you're either going to have a good relationship or it's going to be a bad one. And most of the time, you don't realize it's a bad relationship until it's too late, where either they're not flexible during the project, they only disperse money once a month, they don't do any increases in their loan amounts. There's all these different things that come up with lenders that you should be aware of and appreciate and ask about before you just say, okay, somebody get me the lowest rate. Because rarely is the lowest rate lender going to be the best one. And it's no different than the cheapest t-shirt I can buy is from Walmart, but rarely is that the best t-shirt I can buy. So the team, of course, you need to have a great team around you. Try not to be so cynical that you think everybody on that team is out to get you. I appreciate that there will be some people that you're not sure about or you don't have that trust level yet, but please find a way, whether it's your own version of how to create a good team or you work with somebody, a consultant or whomever, to help you create that team, but you need to have a great team around you. And it will be hard to decide, are they good team members or not, until they actually perform for you. But that's true for both project and acquisition, as well as it is for practice team. Dr. Sung, you already know, you're only as good as those team members you have. So if your front office person's terrible, it's going to be pretty rough going. If your dental assistant team is awful, and well, good luck to you. You're really is only strong as your weakest link is a phrase that's been around for forever because it's true. Now, the fifth mistake is accountability, not knowing how and when to hold people accountable. And if you don't know the process and the steps to the process, then you don't understand, well, they've made a mistake. And I should probably be holding someone accountable here, or I'm not sure how to do it, or maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm not sure. So accountability is a real thing that's going to serve you in your project and in your acquisition model, as well as it's going to serve you when you run the practice and everything is a reflection of how you are as a leader. Number 6 is needs versus wants. There's a lot of things out there that you'll need. And then there's that good old fashioned, well, I want this scanner and I want this cone beam and I want this marketing and I want this design. And you have to appreciate that. Yes, I work with doctors on how to get them the wants that I think are really going to have an ROI, but a return on investment is a real thing. And so how do we take that budget from over here and focus on getting you the things that you actually need and then sprinkling in some of the wants that'll be kind of those wow features for you and the practice. Hiring, I think that there are whole courses dedicated on how to hire the right team and how to lead that team and how to train that team. But hiring is a real thing. And I will tell you that good hiring takes time. And it better be a heck yeah when you hire somebody, or it's an automatic no. If you go to hire somebody on your team and it's kind of like maybe I can see this person working out sort of, no bueno, as we say here in Southern Cal. That is not going to work for very long. Understanding that systems. So the interesting thing about systems is, yes, you need systems, but when you're starting a practice, it's hard to implement systems when you're just getting up and running. It's again, I can't help it, but as a parent, I see so many similarities, and that is like, I want my kids to make their bed and get their clothes and all, but there's also a point at which they're young in life, and that takes a bit of time and a bit of repetition for that to become a system in our household. And so the same thing happens in your practice, both acquisition and startup. So you need to understand that, yes, there are systems out there that will help you and what systems you need to deploy. But then the other version of this conversation is, well, how long do those systems take and how much energy and effort before now it's a habit, right? Time. You got to appreciate how much time you need to commit to something versus what you can delegate. And again, there's that conversation, a common theme tonight, which is, am I going to spend time and not a lot of money? Or am I going to go ahead and spend a little bit of money, but I'm going to get back my time? And there are certain intervals throughout a startup or an acquisition or as a CEO, when you're the owner, at which you need to know the difference. Because some of us, my father, Midwest guy, military guy, was very much, oh, if it's not broken, why fix it? That's not a very good way to run a business, because you may not realize it's broken, but in fact, it's not the right thing to do. It may not be broken such that, like, well, we're not getting paid by the insurance companies, but are there a lot better ways to maybe submit insurance claims or get paid faster? Oh, well, maybe we should explore some of those things. So in some cases, you may not realize some things are broken, even though you're going, oh, well, not really, and it's not falling apart. There's just better ways to do it. So should I spend some money to get back that time, or should I spend some time and save some money? It's about knowing where to make those decisions throughout the process. And then, of course, consistency and being able to understand, like, hey, when have I done enough that I should see the result versus I haven't had enough time yet, so no wonder I'm not seeing the result. It's like, when you're a startup, I don't necessarily need you to monitor and measure your production and collections every single day, because some days are going to be busier than others. And ultimately, while I want you to have goals and have targets, it's more advantageous to look at things either on a weekly or even a monthly level as we get to the beginning days of your startup. Now, we get 3 months in, 6 months in, and 12 months in, we can start moving towards daily goals and more metric-driven practices. But there is a point at which consistency means, hey, I need to keep doing this even though I'm not seeing it pay off yet. And or have I been doing it this way for too long? No, I'm never going to see the results I'm looking for. So appreciating that, hey, when the ebbs and flows are at, hey, I know I've done it long enough, or no, I haven't done it long enough yet. And that's what I find more often than not, is that you haven't had enough time go by where you're doing the work day in and day out consistently enough to get the kind of results you're looking for. My job is to try and give you a deadline. Hey, if we don't see it by this time and you're telling me you've done it this way every single day, well, then, yeah, something is broken. Something is wrong. Let's go fix it. This is the slide I end with on every single presentation. It's the law of attraction. If you ever read the book, The Secret, this kind of summarizes the entire book. And clearly you can read it here. But essentially, to summarize it, it is, whatever I give my attention and energy and focus to, whether wanted or unwanted, that's what I'm going to get out of life. So I attract whatever I'm going to get, whatever results I'm going to get based on whatever attention and energy I give. In short, you get what you focus on. So I truly believe that. I hope that this was a solid investment of everyone's time. Here's how to get a hold of me. You can scan this QR code live and in person right now. It'll take you right to all my contact details. You can hit me up on Instagram or on Facebook if you want any of those resources. You can ask Dr. Song. Again, please reference that you were here tonight so I know which thing you're talking about. So if you're like, hey, I want the budget thing, I just don't know which one it is. And I want to make sure I send you the right one. Thank you, Doc. I appreciate it.
Oh, that was amazing, Jonathan. Oh, cool. Anybody has any question for Jonathan? I have a couple of them that we can go over.
Hit me.
One of the question was, I guess, asked real estate people last time too. Do you see more startups coming up because there was a lot more retail spaces that were empty out from COVID?
I don't see more startups coming up. I see a good mix, but I do think it depends on the market. So I think it's market specific. It's hard to say in one way or the other, right? So like in a Texas market where everything is in development and in process, kind of the only thing to do is a startup, because there's so much development happening so quickly. And we all know, like, the mass exodus of California to all these other states, et cetera, that you're almost going to have to do a startup because there just isn't really anybody selling anything, right? Now on the flip side, in a Southern Cal, I think it's a good mix. I think it's a 50-50, but I don't think it's necessarily more than any other. What I will say is I think that when I say young doctor, I mean young in career, meaning like, hey, you haven't done it yet. So young doctor, if you will. I think that consumer sentiment is still very much, I might want to consider buying first before doing a startup because that seems more safe to me. And I usually get those calls where I want to buy a practice, but if we look, Jonathan, if you help me look for the next 6 months and you can't find it, then can you help me go do a startup? And I'll say, yeah, sure I can. Right. But I do get a lot of those kinds of calls. Can we look for something to buy? And maybe they've been doing it on their own, so they don't really know where to look or who to connect with or how to go about that. So they ask me to help them for that, which I'm happy to do. But there'll be a timeline on it. It's, hey, look, if we go turn over every stone possible, 6 months goes by and we got nothing else to show for it, at some point, just opportunity cost of sitting on the sideline is going to really add up and stack up against you. And so then it would make sense to look at doing a startup. But I think that it's market specific, and I still think it's about 50-50. I don't necessarily see, because I'll tell you that rents have gone up as well, and that does drive down people's, hey, I want to go do a startup for 10 grand a month. No, never mind. I don't want to do that. Okay, fair enough. And some banks too. Some banks are like, ooh, gosh, well, 10 grand a month. That's going to be hard to fit inside of our model. That doesn't really work sometimes. Not true of all banks, but you can see that that would be a hindrance.
I see. Gotcha. We got one question here from, can you clarify your thoughts on working with a designer for a startup? Would you say a designer is not worth the money for a startup?
Yeah, so designer versus architect, to just make the definition. Designer being somebody who's going to help you pick out colors, materials, furnitures, fixtures, etc. Depends on how much they're going to charge you for that, but I think a designer can make a lot of sense. Appreciate that if you're going to go hire a designer, let's say that they charge you 15, 20 grand to help you go through this whole process. And I'm not saying they don't do anything. There's a whole lot they do. Then when it's time to go buy the stuff and it costs what it costs, you might go, oh, I could have used some of that 15, 20 grand I spent on you to go buy the stuff. And now I can't get as nice of a stuff because of my budget. Right. So it really just comes down to kind of like, I think Pinterest is a heck of a place. I think you can find a lot of stuff on there, and I'm not saying it that like it can't be overwhelming, but I know that if you go to Pinterest and show a contractor, hey, here's the light fixtures I'm thinking of, like one of these 2 or 3 versions, contractor can say, hey, here's the one that fits inside your budget, and here's the one that's going to be outside of budget, but if you want to spend the money, that's your choice. Okay, cool, great, good to know. And there might be one that's like, if you pick that one, that's going to blow the budget up because now it's going to change how we have to design the ceiling and it's going to mess everything up. And you might go, okay, good. I'm glad I didn't pick that one because I don't want to change how the ceiling is designed. I hope that helps answer that. So I do think there's value in it. It just is a little bit of, what are you going to get in return? Are you going to get nicer finishes and fixtures, or are you just going to get organization and clarity? Because you're like, look, I'm frazzled. I'm burned out. If I have to look at another freaking light fixture and another flooring sample, I'm going to lose my mind. I think it's more about appreciating what you're really paying for. And sometimes just paying for organization and context and the way to get the thing done the right way. You only get one shot at it, so please invest money so that you're going to get this done the right way. Does that help? If you can thumbs up or thumbs down, or you can say, no, that was a dumb answer, I need a different one. Or we can just negotiating down a price on a practice that I'm interested in. Thank you, thumbs up, cool. And who is the person to do the negotiating, assuming they have a broker and I don't? So in short, self-plug here, but it would be someone like me. It could be someone else. You can ask your attorney to do it, not that they really do. Your bank certainly doesn't do it. So you do need, this is again self-plug, but I think everybody should have some sort of buyer's advocate or someone. I don't care if it was let's say that Dr. Song did nothing but buy practices and he's got 10, 15 locations, and you say, hey, Dr. Song, you're my buddy. Can you help me on the nego? And he says, yeah, sure. I can pick up the phone and call this guy and say, no, the price is off and whatever. Like, that's cool too. But you need somebody who's going to go to bat for you, because the broker is going to go to bat for the seller. And I don't know how many people know this, but a broker makes about 10% commission on a sale. So if you're like, oh, I'm buying an $800,000 practice, that broker is going to make 80 grand. And I think that's crazy, but that's a deal that they've made with the seller. That's the agreement that they have in place. And that just comes right off the top of the sale. So the other thing though, is to appreciate that in your negotiation, such that when you go ask them for a reduction in price, even if it's 800 to 750, that didn't really move the needle. It went from 80 grand to the broker to 75 grand to the broker, but the seller lost 50 grand and then 75K off the top, right? So now all of a sudden they went from 800, $80,000 commission, 720 in their pocket, to 75, 750, 75K in commission. You can see how this thing drops pretty significantly for them, the seller. So understand kind of that might help you in your negotiating the price down if you want to take a shot at it. I've got some other tactics, but in essence, like you do need somebody that's going to go to bat for you. It's very similar, Dr. Song, when you have those commercial real estate guys on, you know, they'll be candid with you and say, look, we're not attorneys. We're not going to negotiate the legal aspects, but your attorney is not going to negotiate the financial aspects. They don't know what price per square foot should be. They don't know what the going rate of TI should be. They don't know how many months of free rent, you know, people get in a Tustin or a Beverly Hills or a Santa Monica, but your commercial real estate guys do, you know? So same thing here. It's someone like me understands what to push and pull on in that negotiation. An attorney may not necessarily know that stuff. A bank probably won't even pick up the phone and do that for you. At least not none of the banks that I know, because there's lender liability laws that says legally they can't do that stuff for you. So if I can help you in trying to go do it on your own, it's understanding those economics. If you ask for a reduction in price, plus they got to pay the broker 10%, appreciate that that's part of their hesitation. You need to have a reason to justify why the disconnect. One of the reasons won't work would be, oh, well, your equipment's old. They're going to go, well, dude, I'm already doing 800K with this old equipment. Why can't you? Like, if you're a good dentist, you could do it with the same old equipment, right? That's going to be a tough argument for you to have. You can make up for it in other ways when you negotiate the price, such as asset allocation, and different other metrics out there. Not to, we could probably do a whole webinar on that. So we'll leave that alone. Short answer, Doc, is have somebody on your team that can go to bat for you, whether that's a CPA is a person that could do that, someone like me. Those are probably the two folks that I can think of most readily available. Again, because your attorney won't be able to negotiate economics and your bank won't either. So I hope that helps.
Gotcha. For startup process, how do you structure like human resources? Like, who do you hire first? How do you ramp that up with?
Yeah, startups. I mean, you got to start, especially in Southern Cal, where you know, salaries and hourly rates can get up there, and most folks want full time, and it's hard to be full time as a startup. You got to go front office person and dental assistant. I know some doctors that kind of do I'm going to go a hygienist day one because I don't want to do my own hygiene, but really you can only afford 1 day a week on that model, and you're still going to be there more than 1 day a week. So I say you got to start a little bit lean and mean and have one dental assistant, one front office person. If you get overwhelmed in the beginning days, you can outsource your insurance billing because that doesn't require any patient interaction whatsoever. So you want to offload or outsource the stuff that requires zero patient interaction. And that's if you get overwhelmed with patients and processes and just bogged down and kind of that stuff. I very much caution against like a floater in the beginning, which is one front office person that also jumps in the back on dental days and jumps in the front on more admin days, just because you can't keep all those, you know, you can't keep all those items in the air if you're juggling, and something is going to slip through the cracks. So you're going to forget to call patients back or reappoint patients, or you're going to forget to follow up for insurances, etc. Gotcha. There's another question, or if somebody just fell off mute.
I think that fell off the mute. So when do you bring in the hygienist at what revenue point?
Ooh, this is a tricky one, man, because I will tell you as a clinician, some folks are like, forget the revenue metrics. I just don't want to do the damn hygiene anymore, you know? So if you look at metrics, it's 200 active patients to generate 1 day of hygiene. 1 day of hygiene being 8 patients a day, 1 hour long appointments. But could you do it at 140, 150 active patients? Could you do it at 100 active patients? You certainly could, you know, especially if we're just talking about 1 day of hygiene. I will tell you, there is a bump, there is a lift in the practice shortly after you bring on a hygienist, because there's something happens to the psychology of a patient when you have a hygienist and then the doctor comes in and starts doing treatment planning and diagnosing, right? It's ironic that when the doctor's in there the whole time, you try and treatment plan and diagnose while you're cleaning teeth. While that's efficient from a time economics model, patients don't respond the same way. I don't know why that is. It's just a psychological thing, but it's like, uh-oh, the doctor's in the room now. I better kind of sit up and mind my P's and Q's and listen to what they have to say. When you think about it, when you're cleaning teeth, most doctors, at least that I've physically seen, they're kind of cleaning teeth and kind of diagnosing as they do it. And then it just doesn't have the same gravitas in that kind of treatment case, treatment presentation, case acceptance thing, if you will. Like there's a psychology that you're playing on with the patient in that conversation. And I saw your webinar with Jean. I thought she did a really good job with her stuff. But a lot of that has to do with like, hey, because you have just like a performance on stage, you have to have different people playing different characters. If it's one guy playing all the characters, you're kind of like, this isn't really translating that well for me. Because dude, you were You just put on a wig and then you just kind of put on a, different shirt, and now you're all of a sudden the other guy. It just doesn't work.
Mhm.
So if you had to look at metrics, I would say it's an active patient thing. But I will tell you that, I I see a lot of doctors go a little bit early on the metric part and they come out just fine.
Mhm.
Can you go too early? Yeah, just like you can go too late. If you had to, I'd rather you be too late than too early, just because of economics of it and like you're not spending money out the door. But I will tell you that it comes down to clinicians saying, "I'm just done cleaning teeth, dude. I'm not doing it anymore," and most of them end up being just fine. Most of
Yeah.
them are just fine.
I also think that like hygienists, if they can kind of edify the doctors when they
Yes,
do the cleanings and
yeah,
just
no, no, no. I would tell you that you just got to find a good hygienist. You've got to hold the line on what a good hygienist is and really outline that for them, kind of illuminate like, hey, in my office, this is what a good hygienist does and kind of how they perform for me. I'll keep you on my team for forever as long as you're performing at this, in this manner. That's important in hygiene. You certainly can't have somebody that's just there to clean teeth and go home, right? Everybody's just getting a simple prophy and a polish and a, hey, we'll see you next 6 months. And that's just a recipe for disaster. Because let's not forget that hygienists want 60, 65 an hour in most markets. And it's kind of like, then at some point the economics doesn't work.
Yeah, I see. Um, Also, let's see the other question. So like all the project management goes toward like opening up the office. But I think a lot of doctors actually like scared is like project manager is like biggest part. But then once you open the door, like because they don't really have the experience like going through the hiring process or like
Mhm.
marketing the office, like how much do you help? And then
Yeah.
what's kind of like the timeline on that?
Yeah. So my version is a 6 month, like after doors open version, because I want to make sure that you also need to do it on your own too, right? So there's the first 6 months where during the project, we're making a lot of decisions and I'm doing a lot of prep work with you so that, excuse me, when doors open, you don't really have to focus on those things because we've already done it. Like I do a lot of the hiring for you and a lot of this stuff in advance, marketing and all this stuff. Am I creating your website? Of course not. But I'm going to the marketing company and saying, hey, here's the plan. It's this and then this and then this because we're going to get these results that the doctor said they wanted. And I'm helping you dial in the budget and all the things that go along with that. So then really it's just time to hit go on the marketing side and then it goes. Now, when doors open, I think you've got to have a little bit of experience happen to then appreciate what I'm trying to do. So like when I was growing up, Karate Kid, The Orig was a really kick-ass movie. Okay. I was like, I want to be Daniel LaRusso. Okay. And like what was interesting though about that movie that I didn't realize until I was older, because at first I thought the guy was teaching me, like, why the hell is he waxing the floors and cleaning the cars? This is stupid. Then you kind of appreciated it, but I didn't even appreciate it until I was older. I just was like, where's the fighting? When are we starting to kick butt and do the karate part? Right. There is some of that has to happen when you first open the doors, where you have to just put your head down and do a little of the work. And then when I can say, okay, when this is this is what this means. When this does this is what this means. And so I have a 6 month kind of follow through on my version of it. And at the end of 6 months, I give you the path for the next 6 months. So now we've completed a full year. And on that path, I'm talking about, kind of, hey, here's the things you should see. These are the indicators that you're doing well. And these are the indicators you're not doing so well. If you need to pick up the phone and call me because I'd rather that than some other version of like, uh-oh, this whole thing's going to crap. But I also need you to put your head down and do the work at the same time, right? I can't teach you how to swim by standing underneath you and holding you in the water every single day. You actually have to go to the other end of the pool and back. And I can say, okay, your technique looks like this. You need to do this more. How's your breathing? Looks pretty rough. You need to change your, blah, 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 blah. So there is some of that has to happen too.
Like an athlete, they gotta practice and then get more coaching.
Yeah. So in my 6 months after doors open, it's a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month setup. And then at the end of that 6 months is where I give you the plan for the next six. At that point, you can call me and do anything you want, but I'm also kind of like, hey, you should be at a path right now where you're good to go. If you want more coaching and more things later, I mean, by all means, we can have that conversation. But there's a lot of it too where you're going to get down to just be like, hey, man, I just need more new patients. And I want to go invest my money into that, not into more coaching. And that's respectable. That's totally fine. But at least I know at that point, that's the only variable you have to solve. Just go get more new patients.
Yeah.
There's a question here. How many days a week do you recommend being open first? And the office is closed. You still recommend hiring someone full-time to answer phones on off days. What do you think of purchasing strata over leasing when doing so? Oh, purchasing a space maybe. So I'll go to the first one. when you're opening the doors, most banks will say you're going to be there about 2-3 days a week, and you're going to be at your associate position the other 2-3 days a week. So no one's asking you to work 6 days. We're saying 5 days, but use that 2 days at your associate job and 3 days at your startup, or vice versa. Now, to your point about staff, most front office folks still have value that they can add if they're in the office, quote unquote, full time, but appreciate that most full timers are really 32 hours a week and not 40, because they're used to working 4 days and not 5. If you have to go 40, you have to go 40. And there are things that I give offices that I work with that what your front office person should do. It's your dental assistant that's the toughest one to solve for, because your dental assistant probably wants full time. They're not like a hygienist that can bounce around. But then in the end, you really only want them there on days where you can do production. So, right? So it's a bit of a complicated answer based on the kind of dentistry you want to do and if you're going to take insurances or not. So unfortunately, I can't give you like the, hey, here's the exacts. I can just tell you that no matter what happens, when you're on the phone with the bank to get your loan approved, you're always going to keep your associate position, at least for the first year. No matter what the answer really is between us here on this webinar, and heaven forbid whoever else sees it, you're always going to keep your associate position. And in fact, I believe that you should, at least for the first year. I want you to be in a position to have the money coming in the door and not need it because your startup's going so well. Then of course, I don't want you to be in the opposite, which is I need the money coming in the door and I don't have it because I left my associate job too soon. So it's not maybe the complete answer there, but the complete answer is much more delicate based on what kind of dentistry are you doing, and what kind of insurances are you taking? And then, of course, can we find good people as a dental assistant that'd be willing to work part-time? And there's some things there that we would have to solve for. So I would tell you that in the early days, you're probably doing a 2-3 day a week gig in your startup, and then the other 2 or 3 days at your associate job. If you want to work 6 days, you can, but I'm not recommending 6 days. If I think about purchasing over leasing, right now, to be honest with you, especially Southern California, it's really, really hard to purchase. Price of buildings are through the roof, and if you look at the economics, especially if you go back to that calculator I gave you, you need TI money to get the deal done more often than not. And when you buy a building, you have 2 things hurting you. One is you typically have to lay cash down for down payment, and 2, you have no TI money coming in. So even if you don't have to put any cash down for down payment, you now have no TI money coming in, and you still have that, well, it's going to be $220, $225, $250 a square foot. And you have nothing to offset that cost. And so now you're going to set the hurdle for profitability much higher, because you're probably going to have to borrow all the money for the building plus all the money for construction. Yes, you don't have to put any money down, but that's a much bigger loan payment. And I know the argument is always, well, by the time I pay rent versus pay the mortgage, I'm coming out to be about the same. There's some truth in that, but you're not factoring in, most of the time, people aren't factoring in property taxes and the additional insurance you have to carry on a building when you own it versus a building when you lease it. It's kind of like renter's insurance. You can get renter's insurance for $20 a month, but homeowner's insurance costs a hell of a lot more than that. So the same thing happens when you own a building. When you factor in property taxes and insurance costs, plus the part about you didn't get the TI money, I mean, we're talking about something well into the 6 figures. That the economics, if you just pull that out over a period of time, it takes you a long time to make that money back. So I have a hard time with practice acquisition unless we're in certain markets of the country where building prices are cheap, insurance costs are lower. I mean, goodness, if you haven't heard, the insurance industry in California is crazy right now. I mean, car insurance is up, what, 74% or something goofy like that. And building insurance and homeowners insurance and renters insurance is up through the roof. So those things make it really, really tough right now to buy a building. If you've got a family with deep pockets and you can make economic sense of it, then by all means. I mean, I wouldn't say no, but it's very much not, please don't use the argument, oh, well, by the time I rent or purchase, it's about the same. It's not about the same. You're definitely at a disconnect, at least in SoCal, on buying a building right now.
So like metropolitan area where real estate's super high, pretty much.
I think just about anywhere right now, man. I mean, yeah, can you go out into a Temecula or somewhere like that and get a good deal? I mean, there are good deals to be had. But I think some of those good deals are because of the cost of ownership, like property insurance and taxes are through the roof, that these owners are like, no, I want somebody else to take this off my hands. I don't want it anymore. So make you a good deal up front. Still, you don't have the TI money to get the deal done. So you still have that, my example had a $484,000 budget and $110,000 off the top for TI allowance. So now it's $374,000, right? If it's really 484 and you lose that 110, my example was 700, you really just borrowed 810 instead because you got no TI money. So now you're at 810 plus building costs, all of a sudden profits are getting further and further away. I think it's really tough right now. I don't know if building ownership is going to be something that people consider for a long time, unless it's on practice number 2, or you just establish your first practice and go into building ownership on the second go around. You know, if you can negotiate a lease to purchase option, which is something you talk to your commercial real estate person about, that's an option too. But I don't know. I mean, when you look at some of these corporations that have multiple locations, hardly any of them own their building anymore. Most of them don't want to. They want flexibility. They want ease. If you're a good tenant, your landlord will get you a lease just about any time you want it.
Because you hear a lot about landlord horror stories that people to the buildings, but
I hear you. I mean, there are obviously bad landlords out there. I think that you could hear, I mean, I hear horror stories about all kinds, like banks and my friends that aren't in dentistry are like, oh, I went to this dentist and they screwed up my teeth. And I'm like, we probably just went to a bad dentist. Like, right? There was that documentary that got pulled from Netflix, right? That was saying root canals are killing people. When it came out during COVID or whatever, they pulled it because they got sued by, I think, American Endo Academy or something like that. But like, there was a documentary out there saying, hey, root canals are killing people. You know what I mean? So like this, you could find anything out about anything. I think that, you know, most people, when they buy a building, don't want to come out and tell you, oh, I screwed up. Right. So that's why you don't hear any of those bad stories. They just go, oh, well, yeah, this is cool. Owning your building's cool, because they don't want to be wrong, you know?
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. Maybe last questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, I think our time with Jonathan is almost up.
Thank you.
Comments for us? Last comment? Last comment for us?
It was a pleasure. I hope you guys really saw this as an investment of your time, and take me up on some of those, you know, tools that I threw out there, and connect with me on social media. You know, I'm really here to make sure that you guys get kind of access to the things that are going to be helpful. If we work together, great. If we don't, all good. I commend anybody that's willing to go down the path on starting their own journey. Because honestly, I feel like if you don't do it, then the corporations will take over, right? There was a phrase out there. I think it was the old Secretary General. Oh, I'd have to look this up now, because it was like maybe 2010, 2011, pretty old. But he was like, hey, if the folks that don't have MBAs don't put a plan together, then for their future, then the MBAs of the world will put a plan together for their future. And it was an interesting take on like, hey, if you don't, especially in the MD world and in the DDS world, it's, if you didn't go to business school, and everybody with an MBA knows that. And so, you know, even if you did go to business school, like I worked with some doctors, ironically enough, that were dentists and had MBAs. And I would be like, hey, well, so if you have an MBA, you want my help? Like, are you sure? And like, the first thing I learned in MBA school was find people smarter than you and put them on your team. So yeah, you've done it a hell of a lot more than I have. I have an MBA, but I haven't done this a couple hundred times in my life. So let me find somebody that has. And so my point is that I want you guys to really get the help that you need, whatever that may be. I've got a lot of resources out there. I know a ton of people on the East and West Coast and anywhere in between. So hit me up if you're stuck or you need help, or ask Dr. Song how to get a hold of me. Because I would hate for you to go down the path and think, oh, well, I guess this is the only option I have. And that option sounds like a DSO, or, you know, even if it's one single owner doctor, but they're trying to take advantage of you, that happens a lot too. You think there's this one lowly single owner doctor, and you went into associate for them, and they're going to let you buy it one day. And it turns out, that one day keeps getting pushed further and further and further out. And you're going, wow, it's been about 10 years and I still don't own a damn practice. What am I doing? So for whatever that's worth. Take care.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You guys, see you again.